Okay, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody. Wednesday night Zoom Big Book Study Workshop with a program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women. Let's open with the serenity prayer. What do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Good to see everybody online. Okay, so we're at an interesting point. If you're kind of new to us, kind of relax, you'd probably be too busy thinking anyways most of the meeting, so that's cool. You know, that's what we do, right? But we're kind of getting into the second half of how it works. And this is interesting where we go with this, because they're setting up an idea of the human condition here, right? We just finished last week the first half of how it works. And they kind of point out time and time again, unless this change happens, we're really not going to experience life on the level that we're hoping on, right? Because as long as we're dealing with alcoholism, the chances of us recreating our lives are pretty nil, right? It's just a matter of time before we're drinking again, right? Out of all the people who've come to AA, not everybody stays, right? Even though, because the mindset that gets you here won't keep you here. Right? There has to be a shift, and a shift that we can't create. So we've kind of gone over that in great detail. They talk about two different elements that happen, right? There's the human condition that causes us all our problems, and we think it's alcoholism. Well, alcoholism causes you a problem when you're still drinking, right? And then when you try to get sober, there's a component of your mind that's still present, right? And they call that the malady, right? You can't see, feel, and touch it. Because if we could see, feel, and touch it, then we treat it when it comes up, right? Wouldn't that be nice, eh? I'll apply the steps when I think there's a problem, right? Right? But that's how a lot of us approach this. We think we could see relapse coming, right? That's why they give us a couple examples of the one guy, Jim. Remember Jim? Ounce of whiskey in the milk? And it shows us how our brain works a bit, because how many people read that story and came up with excuses why he drank? Well, see, he's irritable here, got in a fight here, and he's back in a slippery place, there's triggers, blah, blah, blah. And then they go, okay, we know how you're thinking, so let's give you the other example. The guy didn't have a care in the world, right? And he thought, as he crossed the threshold to the dining room, he thought a couple highballers would be nice. So why do they use those two examples? What's the similarity between those two people? Even though characteristically they're two different people altogether, they're having both different experiences, right? Are they not? Yeah. Did either one of them see relapse coming? So what's the common characteristic why they use those guys as an example? The malady, the condition of the mind. That's the only two reasons. And then the other one, which is one of our biggest struggles in sobriety, is that we think we can figure this thing out. Anybody been to a meeting lately? Lots of people figuring this thing out, right? And it must be this, it must be that. And so then they go working on those, which is nothing wrong with that, like self-development. But as long as this component's still present, you're never going to get anywhere, right? And so what they talk about earlier is they gave an example of our first problem is the self-obsession. Anybody? Nobody? I know nobody in this group has problems with that, right? Being self-obsessed, right? And what that looks like is you're in conversation with yourself all the time, and you're coming up with conclusions based on self, what is going to make your life different. Anybody? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And so it's hard to see the example of what that looks like, and because our ability to self-assess is really not our strong suit. Anybody have a hard time with that? Right? And so the example they give of this person, and this is something we've got to kind of watch going into the fourth step, because it could easily, this is where the shift happens, right? There's always going to be a kind of, from here forward, there's always going to be that struggle between self taking over and the spiritual path taking over, right? Like applying spiritual principles to all our affairs. So the example they give on that, which is kind of interesting, is on page 27. They talk about what a self-obsessed person looks like. Or 26, sorry. Remember that certain businessman had had ability, good sense, and high character. So you see, his human potential was pretty good, but he had a problem, right? What was the problem he was suffering from? Alcoholism. But it wasn't, see, he looked at it as a problem he had. He didn't see it was something that had him, right? And a lot of us have a hard time with that because a lot of us think we're on this side of it because we're sober, right? I'm on this side of it, I'm sober. As long as I watch for this, do this, and he kind of talks about that going through here, right? Where he thought relapse was unthinkable. How many people been there? So technically, and you hear it in meetings all the time, right? I'm doing so good now, based on what? 5 meetings you've been to, and you're doing so good now. They can't hear it because they're mistaking feeling better for getting better. Anybody been there? And life's looking good. Why wouldn't it look good? Starting to get a paycheck, you're showering, you're looking good, maybe you're getting some nookie, and like things are good, like life's good, right? All the essentials are starting to happen. People are starting, answer the phone when I call. Maybe I get a place. I move from a buggy to a car. Life's good, right? I remember I had panic when I had more stuff than I could put in my car. I was like, anyways, that's a whole different thing, right? Matching suitcases, green garbage bags. Anybody? Right? So this guy, he thought he had it going on. And as soon as he made the statement where he said relapse was unthinkable, if you heard him in the meeting, for those of us who've been through this, he just told us he hasn't done step 1 yet. He admits he has a problem, but not a problem that he can't look after. And we hear that. How many people have been there? Right? Like, most people talk like they're going to stay sober forever now because I made up my mind. Anybody? Mm-hmm. And so what had to get his attention again was relapse. And that is, you hear people say, relapse isn't a part of recovery. It's the first step. Mm-hmm. It's the first step in qualifying us to see if we need to do the rest of this. Because if we could stay sober on our own, because we didn't have the second symptom, how many people this would be a 12 and 12 study. We'd be talking about Bill's story, right? Talking about his experience and can I expand on that? Sure you can. Go ahead, right? 2 days sober. Talking about how Bill's experience can be yours after 13 years, right? He's got 13 years. We got a couple weeks, and we think we could kind of have the same experience as him, which is impossible, right? Why is it impossible to have the same experience Bill's talking about in the 12 and 12? You need to do what he did to get that experience. Most of us don't want to do that stuff, right? Can I just talk about the things that I think I should be doing? Anybody been there? So we see he's struggling with his thinking and the self-obsession, and what crashes that is another relapse, yes? And then he gets in the place where he has the step 1 experience. The step 1 experience is when you come to a place where you're drinking against your own will. And sometimes that happens in AA, and sometimes that happens before you come to AA. So how would you know that is you have to understand alcoholism, right? And as you look back, I see this characteristic has been there all along, right? So my last... I've always had step 1 experiences without realizing because I didn't know what they were. And then the self-obsession would take over on pulling up my, going to meetings, I'm going to get this time because I mean it. Not understanding that the same thinking that got me here won't keep me here, right? So my last night drinking, I remember I relapsed. I had the 3-month chip in my pocket. And that afternoon, I was talking like everything was fantastic. And you couldn't tell me different. It was fantastic. 11 years of in and out. Right? You think a part of my brain was, hey, maybe you haven't figured this out. It's never done that because this time, I mean it. This time is going to be different. Give me another chance. Let me in, coach. Anybody? Right? We think circumstances will create the change sufficient enough for us to stay the course. And if you didn't have this illness, then yes, then you'd be able to stay the course by applying self to self. That's what this guy. So if this guy over here on page 26 didn't have the malady, the second symptom in alcoholism, would he have been able to recreate his life? And did he? Yeah, he did. Right? He was feeling good. Right? Remember, he left here, he felt good. He had the inner workings of mind. Relapse was unthinkable. He's feeling good about all the work he did on him. He's meeting with Carl Jung. Right? But what he doesn't understand is alcoholism. So now he has a good understanding of it on page 27 when he says you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, right? So that is the condition that places us beyond human aid, right? They call it a phenomenon, right? An unexplainable event, a blank spot, the suddenly, plain insanity. Anybody, right? It kind of describing this thing. That's why step 2 says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. To restore something is to bring it back to its natural condition, right? That means before this thing started being paramount in our thinking. So by removing the problem, and why people get in arguments with this thing is they say we don't recover. Well, if we didn't recover, then we'd be in a constant state of relapse. Does that kind of make, there'd be nobody really with long-term sobriety. It would be like, how long can I last this time? Right? Does that kind of make sense? So those who have longevity said they've undergone a change sufficient enough for them to recover, meaning no longer suffering from the condition they were pre the psychic change or spiritual experience. So step 2 is an outlay of the course of action, right? Right? And we see the purpose of the course of action is to enable us to what? Well, that's the byproduct, is the spiritual experience. That's what we're hoping for. See, we see that in 12. But in step 2, well, they come to believe. So where do they do that outlay of what they mean by that is in page 44, 45, right? So they give us the set of this idea that will go with us for the rest of our lives. This will never change. Either you're in harmony with it or you're lacking it. Right? Power. Right? To create this change. Right? And so when we went through We Agnostics, this is where I hear a lot of people kind of going, oh, they talk about God too much. Well, we never complain about you not talking about God, right? So that means you still have a problem with inside of yourself that you haven't come to terms with. And if you've gone through We Agnostics, then that settles that debate, right? We just call it, creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, right? Whatever, czars of the heavens. But what you call it is secondary. So we for lack of better common understanding, we understand this power to be God. Right? It's not a religious idea. It's based on lack of powers on the dilemma. How do we get access to this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about, right? Does that kind of make sense? So I need to find a way to utilize this spiritual kit of tools laid at our feet that these people that went before us had incorporated in their lives to create this change. Does that kind of make sense? So step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result, one purpose, the result of these steps. So those who don't experience this psychic change, what do they end up experiencing? Relapse. That's kind of, so whatever you did before wasn't sufficient enough to keep you here, or the longevity, right? Because it's not short term. We're looking for the long game. Anybody? Does that kind of make sense? It's the long game. Yeah, we want, I want to leave this earth not the same way I came into AA. Yeah. Right? I'm looking for a different experience, right? And they say it's possible. So I need to learn. It's kind of like we were talking about earlier, and if you ever watch Survivor, right? It's an interesting show where they put people all individual in different places, and they isolate them from other people. And then it becomes very apparent their belief system, whether it will work toward longevity or not. So they'll put certain ideas and practices into place that actually end up working toward their demise, right? It won't allow them the survival necessary in those elements. Follow me here. And the more trouble they have with the inability to apply certain principles that allow them to survive, then the mental anguish starts happening. Right? They're alone, left with themselves. You following? Huh? So what happens is somewhere along the line, they end up talking to a volleyball. Remember that show? Right? And a lot of people joke the package that the guy had was a cell phone. That's kind of like, went and delivered it anyways. But that's kind of like us. When we get separated from the fellowship and left to our own devices, who are you left to talk with? Yourself. You're talking to a volleyball soon, right? And the more time you spend alone, the worse it gets. Anybody ever experienced that? Mm-hmm. And you could be that way within a room full of people. How your mental state can change like that. One day you do all the aspiration, life's fantastic, and the next day is like, I don't know whether to slash or kill somebody. Let's flip a coin, right? So you'll see where we're getting here. So the human perplexity or the human challenges is the ability to see when my mind's working against me. But unless you know how to do that, see it, then it'll work again, and you're the only one that don't know it's working against you. That's why we have always, in hindsight, anybody real smart here in hindsight? It's the foresight that seems to be a problem. Didn't see that coming. You're the only one. Everybody else got out of the way, right? So, as we went through how it works, so from here for page 45 on, starts talking about the human problem. And we agnostics deals mostly with the thinking problem. And we create our own stumbling blocks belief based on our belief system. We all have a belief system. Most people say, belief system is usually tied to a religious idea. Your belief system is you're some result of everything you believe, feel, and done. Anybody get a warm, fuzzy feeling when? so no, right? So it's kind of like, so that's why this is something fundamentally has to change in our thinking. That's why when we got to page 44, 45, later when you start studying that, 54, 55, when you start studying that, you see where they talk about the fabric of our existence was shot through with our belief system, how we worship, how we think, where we pay our attention, where we pay our energy. These define the decisions we make, right? And so if your brain has you, how would you know if you're really making sound decisions? So how many people have made decisions here based on self that later you had to apologize for? But at the time, it was perfectly good sense. Here's a good one. How many people had an argument with themselves with somebody who wasn't there yet and you're waiting for them to show up? And then when they showed up, you continue the argument like they've been there the whole time. And they're like, what? You know what? No, I don't. Right? So we see that's a problematic mind, right? And if you can't see it, you're always going to have problems. Right? I call it bipolar recovery. One day you're doing great, the next day you're apologizing. One day, wow, look how great it is. Today, should I kill myself? Like, that's like, come on, I can't be alone in that, right? Okay. So we go through how it works. I said this change needs to happen. The second half of how it works is interesting, where they talk of this shift. Remember we talked about the shift, and all the way through here, nobody talks about working the steps. I don't know if anybody's kind of picked up on that yet. But through this process, nobody's ever talked about working the steps. They all talk about developing these principles. It's all about these principles. So the principles we learn through this process is what they talk about in the second half of how it works. It talks about, many of us exclaimed, one order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these steps. No, to these principles. Because once you've gone through this, it removes the barriers. There's no longer barriers in between steps. They're all in sync. It becomes a working part of the mind. When you get into step 11, it's not compartmentalized. The only time you need to compartmentalize is when you're struggling and kind of what's going on here. You're able to step back and assess what's happening and my lack of power. How do I get access to power to create an internal change sufficient enough to match calamity with serenity. right? It's kind of like, how do I be able to assess that? But if you can't sidestep your own thinking, you'll always be victimized by it. Anybody been victimized by their own thinking here? And the more we get into our thinking, you notice how dark we start getting darker and darker, and it seems like your soul is imploding on itself, and here it gets tight, and anxiety starts happening, shortness of breath. How many people? And there's nothing happening, just you left unsupervised. Right? It's like, here we go. So they talk about we're not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. When does that start?
After the psychic change or the spiritual awakening?
Well, kind of. That we're willing to grow along spirit. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So where would the progress start? In order to have progress, you have to have a starting point, right? After step 4. Because you get to see you unsupervised. For the first time. You get to assess you. A lot of people say, my 4th step is how I used to be. No, your 4th step is how you are, unsupervised. You are a sum result of you. So when we get into that part, it'll be interesting how they start rolling along that lines. But before they get into that, this is a part of the book that's really misunderstood. Right? And so when we look at what they're talking about and what we need to do to have the same experience of them is quite interesting. So they talk about here, we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Before and after what? Doing this process. That never changes. Made clear when I'm running on self-will and when I'm living by spiritual principles, right? But the point is, when you get off track now, you're able to kind of, like, something happens in here, and if you ignore it, they call that defiant. I know nobody in here is defiant, right? And what gets back on track is pain. Pain seems to be a good motivator. Anybody ever notice that? You ever notice the more pain you're in, the better your hearing becomes? I don't know what it is. It's something around that, right? So what they're saying here is when we get in, so A, that we're alcoholics and could not manage our own lives. Obviously, if you're getting drunk all the time, you're doing really good, things are fantastic, and get loaded again. Anybody? Yeah. Right? The only people around you, and then we get mad at people because they're still skeptical about our sobriety. I'm 3 months sober now. Why you treat me like this? It's not much. Last 10 years. 3 months, good start. Okay. That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Relieved this condition. Right? See that God could and would if he were sought. So, being convinced. We were at step 3. They use that word a couple times, right? Convinced. Right? So it's interesting here. We were at step 3. At step 3. Watch the wording there, right? Which is that we decided to turn our will and life over the care of God as we understood him. We have an understanding now. The basis of that understanding is I got to get access to this power, yes? So we call that, instead of writing out a whole essay like they did earlier, God, are the heavens, okay, which one you want to call it? So when we say God now, right, you can say, okay, back when I went through this, I came to the place of, because of my doctrine and background, and I was so, right, with all different people's ideas on this stuff, like Pentecostal, right, Baptist, Pentecostal, Roman Catholic, Nazarene, Charismatic. You think I got problems? Find a God of your understanding? Oh, now I'm in deep shit, because my understanding's killing me. But now I have a new understanding. Right? I understand what they mean by this thing, so I was able to formulate my conception along the lines that they were talking. It's my conception, right? And so I called it a frequency. As weird as that may sound, is like I'm a receiver. That means there has to be transmitter. I got that, right? And back in the old days, you punch in. Remember when you had with the radio in the car, you punch it, and it wouldn't quite get the station. and then you kind of move it over again, and it sounds good. And then you ever get those stations where it doesn't sound good, but you finally got a bit of noise, and you're listening to it, and then after a while it gets irritating? That's us, left to our own devices. Oh, that's a nice thought, and then after a while it's getting irritating. Okay. So turn our will and life over. So what does that, so the care of, so a lot of people think, that's what I do in step 3. But what they're talking about is turn my thinking and my actions, my will, right? Will and lives. My life is a sum result of all my thinking, yes? So if I'm turning my will and my life over, that means that my thinking and my actions, the first thing they're going to want to do is assess what's going on there to apply spiritual principles to create a change where I'm governed by different ideas. Yes? That's the spiritual experience in the back, which was once the guiding forces of the are cast to one side. That means they're still there, right? You could show up at any time, right? But as long as you're spiritually fit, you don't have to worry about Tony showing up. That's what my wife calls it when I'm unspiritually fit. Oh, Tony's showing up. And that's the way we look at it. When I show up, because I become instinct fear-based. I'm in dialogue with myself. And I'm in dialogue with what I think you're thinking. And what I think what you've done. And the injustice that's happening to me. I know nobody's like that in this room. Right? And I can build a conversation. And the more you resist it, the more I'm right. And the more, hell breaks loose. Anybody? Yeah. And then I like to, when you explain people, you're thinking what's going on, and they just look at you like, huh? You'll find that funny later. Okay, over to God, as we understand, just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Who done? Them. See that question mark? Is this where we stop and kind of start, well, this is what I think. You notice they haven't asked you what you think yet, eh? Anybody? Or your opinion? Well, we've gone on long enough. What do you think? Like, they know what you think, right? If you've read this far along and you're going along, you probably have the same condition that they have. So they're going to explain what they did. What do we mean by that, and just what did we do? Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. The first requirement that they had to experience, yes? Mm-hmm. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. A lot of us think we know what they mean by that. Impossible. You felt the consequences of your life, but you don't know what they mean by that. What created it? Where did it stem from? What's the origin? Like, how does this manifest? How did this thing continue? How does this story keep unfolding the same way? What's the creation of this story? Does that kind of make sense? So they talk about the first requirement, we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I don't know what that looks like. I know what it feels like. Court, warrants, people not talking to me, unpaid child supports, court dates, police looking for me, warrants. How you doing? Not bad. Got $20? No. So can hardly be a success. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. So the self-assessment before they went through this process is, my motive is, look, I'm just trying to be helpful. Why are you treating me like this? The argument starts. Anybody? Mm-hmm. Anybody not treating us the right way? Look, I've been nothing but nice to you. Look, blah, blah, blah. But then again, conflict. All my best efforts turn in conflict. Nobody here, though, right? They're not even looking at me. Neither online. They're all doing something else now. Okay. Most people try to live by self-propulsion on their own power, right? Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballots, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if people would only do as he wished, the show would be great. How many people sat in a meeting and tried to figure out their life? Come on, everybody's hand should go up. How am I going to take care of this problem? How am I going to take care of that? What am I going to say to them? How am I going to avoid this? I'm still not answering calls with, call display right now. Block numbers, not answering. I ain't still getting upset when I get envelopes, people wanting their money. Still problems at work. Anybody? Or not working. Just problems just walking around. Anybody? And we sit there trying to figure out how we're going to fix self. How many people has done that here? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say that. We just qualified ourselves. Right? As soon as anybody have as soon as recovery? As soon as, right? So the whole meeting's based on your mind as soon as, and preemptive strike. Meaning, what am I going to say to this person? What if they find out about this? Oh my God, what if they find out about that? How do I avoid this? How do I avoid that person? That person's going to talk to me about the steps again. How do I avoid him? Clearly would be pleased. Life would be so wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite vigorous. Is that what it is? Virtuous. Is that kind? Yeah, kind. He may, virtuous. Morals, okay. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. Look at everything I do for. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. That's a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, right? Yeah. That's our traits. What does that mean? As long as you're doing what I want you to do, I'm going to treat you good. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to punish you, and you're gonna kind of comply. You're gonna get in line. Anybody ever try to talk to you about your drinking? Did you punish them? They don't talk to you about your drinking anymore. There's silence in the home, right? As they hear the key in the door, the anxiety inside the home starts. The phone call. Anybody get the phone? Oh my God. Phone call. Hello. Oh, fuck. Whoops, sorry. So it's kind of like voicemail. Then they assess whether they'll call you back. Does this sound kind of familiar like our life? And then what we do is wonder what their problem is. On the other hand, maybe mean, but as with most humans, not alcoholics, with most humans. So what are they talking about here? The alcoholic dilemma or the human dilemma? The human dilemma. What do we apply to the human dilemma? Alcohol. Right? Remember once upon a time it worked? Then it stopped working? Damn. Right? Now the problem starts when it stops working. Now that we're sober, we need something new to apply to the human condition. Otherwise, you're left with the perplexity of the disturbance in our own mind. And we're used to that noise. Right? If somebody else lived in your mind for a little while, would you claim the serenity that you've been claiming? If you had one of those those things that they read?
Oh, yeah.
Teleprompter. So you're sharing a meeting, the teleprompter's going. It'd be like, remember that game show? Well, it says here. That's not true. Yeah, it's really good. So does that kind of make sense? So most of us, anybody ever lived by an airport? Yeah. Or visit by an airport? Or been the noise of the airplanes going across? It's quite noisy. Except for the people who live in that area. They just become accustomed to it. Same with train tracks. The closer you live to the train, the more the house. So we live by train tracks. We live by the airport, and we live by the stadium. Who we look for is the person in the crowd who's making the loudest, who talks the loudest in the crowd. That's who we get our advice from, the loudest voice in our head. That's usually instinct-based, right? But we don't know that. So what usually happens, the show doesn't come off. Oh, boy. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. Anybody? Our second best friend, self-pity? Yeah. Nobody here though, right? He begins to think life doesn't treat him. He decides to exert himself even more. The same thing that caused the problem, now I'm going to really, and that's like sobriety. I'm going to exert myself even more to bring about the desired result. Wow. But the problem is we can have a glimpse of it, but we don't really see it, right? We have moments. Okay. He becomes even on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still the play doesn't suit him, admitting he may be somewhat at fault. Somewhat. Today at the meeting, everybody was talking about, the potential of what they could have been, instead of realizing who they are. Oh, I wonder who I am. Do a 4-step, you'll find out exactly who you are. Right? So, somewhat at fault. He is sure that other people are more to blame. Nobody in this room, right? More to blame means my childhood. More to blame my job, people, exes. Excuses. I'm this way because, so my biggest struggle my first 11 years, in and out, I was married to my story. I wasn't ready for a new story because my story defined me. I'm this way because of this. My sponsor says, no, you're this way because you haven't had the opportunity to change. Right? You're this way because you haven't had the opportunity to change. Does that kind of make sense? So I tie excuses for who I am today based on past events. No, those have nothing to do with who I am today. I am the way I am today is because I haven't taken the necessary change. So my one daughter, she was going through something. She called me today. Yay, finally. She took a couple months and she had to sort some stuff out. She doesn't have an alcohol problem, no drug problem. She has a human dilemma. And she just took some time out to do some reassessing. Right? She phoned me, says, Dad, thanks for the space. She says, I've sought some outside help. I'm getting things sorted out because she went through a bad breakup. The human thing, right? She didn't know how to manage it, right? She needed to take a break from everybody, and she sought outside help. So when she talked to me today, she was able to say exactly what got her to that place and what she's doing to get out of it. I didn't have that foresight, right? That kind of, and we're kind of doing the same thing. Alcoholism brought us to a certain place. I don't know how to get out of it, so we come here seeking a solution, hopefully viable, where I could have a different experience, right? And so what happens is they put it in here. But our resistance to this is amazing. It really is, the resistance to the change. Even people come in here looking for change. This is what we offer. I don't like that. Can we start doing our own thing? Here, we're going to make our own book. We're gonna start our own meetings. I don't like the way you guys are doing it. But the problem is, that way may be successful for your small group, but if you get one of us in there that your way don't work for, then we die. Interesting, eh? So, not that I have an opinion on that. Okay. So what is the basic trouble? Is he not a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim, underline that, of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if it only means well? Manages well. So if somebody has a delusion, who's the only one that don't know they're having it? It's the person who's afflicted with it. Everybody who's listening and watching you going, wow. That's the beauty of the fellowship. When we come to the fellowship, we get to hear you share. And you think it's the best thing you can, and then you have a more experienced member come up to you and go, hey, how you doing? Where are you in the process? What process? Page 417, I read it every day. No, there you go, Ray. You were wondering when that was coming out there, eh? So, but and they talked about that earlier, right? If a mere code, right, better philosophy in life was sufficient to recover, then most of us would have recovered long. We've tried everything. Can we say yes? Mm-hmm. We've tried everything. So now we're in here like a dog going to get neutered, dragging our nail. Ah! It's like, come on, you'll like it. Drink the Kool-Aid. It's kind of like the only one you ever notice the only one unhappy about this process is the people on this side of the process and not the people on the other side of the process? The people on the other side of the process, holy shit, this is wonderful. Because you have to experience it. It's something beyond an intellectual exercise. So, So it goes on, which is interesting here. So then on the next page, it talks about here, page 62. Selfish, self-centered. That we think is the root of our trouble. That who thinks? Them. Right? Driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. Self-seeking, self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but invariably we found that at some point in the past we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. How do they know that?
They've experienced it.
But what defined that? So you see, it's like we're experiencing it, but we can't come to analyze it the same way they're doing it. They have a different perspective of it that I don't. See, the first time I read this page, I've thought about 4 other people it applied to. How many people, when they heard this page read, thought about somebody else it applied to?
Yeah.
I went home and I wanted to put this on a nightstand where my girlfriend could read it. I was thinking, no wonder I have problems. She's all of these things. Right? Yeah, so notice how they're talking in past tense here. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme. Who is? The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. That's why we can't use our thinking to assess ourselves. Because we're on the other page, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I must be doing good because I'm feeling good, but what course of action are you doing to create change? So if we were, say if we were in a plane wreck somewhere and we're in the middle of nowhere, and there was one group of people that found a map and a compass, and there was another group of people that figured they knew the way out, who would be successful? Map and compass. Why wouldn't this other group be successful? Because what happens is, if you do a long enough perimeter, you come back to where you started. We have one leg a little shorter than the other. We naturally walk in circles. It may sound kind of weird. If you were in the desert, right? You think, oh, this makes sense. So you're walking days. Sooner or later, you'd go more to the right or left, whatever the situation. And then with us is, we'd see another foot of footprints, and we'd go, oh my God, there's somebody else here. And then you would hurry, right? It sounds kind of weird, but that's how a lot of us navigate sobriety. Based on self, based on what I hear, based on, okay, this looks like a path here. This looks like a path here. And then there's another group of people say, well, we have a map, which is the big book. We become the compass, and God becomes, or this power becomes true north. And what you do is you line up the two, and you head to the desired place that you hoped on reaching. Does that kind of make sense? And then if you got on course, now we have equipment that says recalculating, and that's what step 11's about. So this thing becomes a working part of the mind of these principles to get access to the GPS, right? God's prayer system, right? The GPS. And then you're able to sit back and realize, listen, that you need to recalculate, you reassess, apply spiritual prayer, and you move in a new direction. How cool is that? That's the longevity between those who make it and those that don't, is those who incorporate this path. Rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. So, in order for us, so we'll go here. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. Though he usually doesn't think. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. What is that selfishness they're talking about? We must be rid of a certain component, or it kills us.
Self-running self?
Our thinking.
Totally.
Our thinking is designed to bring us back to the same place we're trying to get away from. It's just designed to recreate the exact same story that I'm trying to get away from. How many people has moved here? I'm going to start a new life. and then you create the same life. Anybody ever? Anybody have relationship problems here? Nobody? Well, you ever notice that you get to a place where you're at an impasse in a relationship, and you're going to try harder and you really mean it this time, and you do good for a little while, and then your thinking takes over again. The narrator starts talking. Who needs this? I don't need this. But earlier you were begging for another chance, and 3 months in is you're doing them a favor by staying. You're actually doing them a favor by leaving. Nobody realizes that. But you know what I mean? You're back to that emotional deformity and problems with people. And that's the bedevilments. Prey to misery and depression. Anybody here prey to misery and depression? You could only stay in that state for so long before the insanity of alcohol returns again. We need a viable solution to the human dilemma. But first, we need to move, it's kind of like, I call it shithouse recovery, where you're in the outhouse all the time and you're used to the smell. You ever been in an outhouse? Nothing good about it. But we're saying, hey, we got indoor plumbing in here, eh? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I like the privacy. But it may sound kind of weird, is they're saying, we have a new experience over here for you. Well, I don't know what indoor plumbing looks like. Well, come with that. No, it's okay. Right? And then what happens is, without realizing, life moves the shit house 3 feet over. You're left with the hole. How did I get in here? Okay, anyways. Yeah, they're saying, well, you got the shit again, sooner or later. So then they give us the idea. Here, we must be rid of this selfishness or kill. God makes this power, God makes this possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. So there is possibilities of being totally rid of the thing that you're suffering from. Totally rid of it. How cool is that? Right? A new freedom and a new happiness. Right? It's kind of really wild. So it talks about, again, here, and they're often, okay, many of us had moral and what's that big word? Philosophical. Yeah, philosophical convictions galore. True? There's no short of that happening in a meeting, is there? Well, let me tell you what I think. Well, could you tell me your experience? Not yet. Still reading page 417. On the same problem? Yes. You'll get that later. I always heard this person. I got acceptance on the same problem every day. You've had this problem for a month. Okay, so anyways, you'll get it later. Okay. So then they talk about neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. Well, we're getting a new manual here, right? It didn't work. Next, we decided that the hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. What does the director do? Well, I work on movie sets, right? So the director knows everything that's happening on that set. And in his mind, he has 5 or 6 different scenes happening. He'll have this scene happening over here. He'll have that scene happening over there. And then he'll direct the whole crew to go over here, shoot this scene. And then he'll direct the crew to go over there. And he does that on a daily basis. He has an outlay of the week, what it's roughly going to look like. But he could switch that at any time. Mm-hmm. And at the end, it goes in a can. And it goes to production. What they do is they splice it all together. And then what we do is we see the movie. That's kind of like our life. It takes all these scenes that lead us to an overall new experience, right? The experience of Alcoholics Anonymous, and how that how it unravels is one day at a time by the shifting in thinking, right? And so you figure if we got here as a result of every decision we ever made, right? You think about that. 1 hour, one day at a time, we ended up here. So they're saying within a short period of time, they give the window of 2 months. If you give this 2 months and you go through this process, you could have a whole new experience. Remember the spiritual appendix in the back? Within 2 months, what created your whole life to get here, within 2 months, you could have a totally different outlook and attitude upon life. And the people around you will start experiencing the promises. you have a whole new experience, and you'll suddenly realize that this has happened, this shift. You suddenly realize that this power, or God, creative intelligence, has created this shift that you could have a different experience, right? And so they talk about here. So here's the principle. We're as agents, which is cool. An agent means I take marching orders on a daily basis, right? And if I'm taking care of these moments, these hours, and these decisions on an hourly and daily basis, based on my connection to something else that I'm seeking counsel with, am I going to start having a different experience soon? Remember in Bill's story? He didn't have this recipe, and he recreated the same thing. Ebby showed up, and he's seen the possibility of this experience in his friend. Remember that? His ideas of miracles were revised right then and there. Yes? He's seen it was only a matter of being willing to do what his friend did. He might have what he saw in his friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So he would have to do the same thing his friend did, yes? Even though he had that moment of the idea of hope, right? He was exhilarated for a moment, but it didn't create change. A lot of people have mistaken the feeling of hope for change, right? It's kind of like if we were in a shipwreck and we were in a lifeboat, right? We're out there for 4 or 5 days, and the water was gone, and our demise looked at like it was going to happen. How many people would get excited if they seen a cruise liner go by?
Oh, yeah.
They don't know you're in the boat, but it'll give you the feeling of hope, right? What you need to do is get their attention to see you. You ever see movies? They see the airplane go by. Hey, hey. Right? All this stuff happens, right? So here it's making. This process makes that connection, and that's what they're saying here, which is really cool. So next we decided hereafter. Okay, so he is the father, and we're his children. When you think about that relationship, that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Right? When you think about that relationship, and so when I had the refund, what does that mean? So when I look back, I didn't look at my relationship with my father. Oh my God, who wants that? Right? But the idea of the ways. Is the idea like with my daughters, right? They never had to worry for nothing. I didn't have that same experience growing up. But on an ideal home, right? My kids, when they went to bed, they knew I was going to be there in the morning, right? And when they went to sleep, they weren't worried about it. They didn't fall asleep anxiety based because the people were there. When they woke up, all the windows, everything was there. When they went to school, they had clean clothes, lunch and all. And every day, I developed their life with some resistance. I developed their life to get them ready for life, right? And so when they moved out, they were ready for life. That was my job. It was to get them ready for life. Does that kind of when you kind of look at that, and how did that happen? It was one day at a time, where they got to a place where they kind of looking back. They had all the elements they needed for a successful life. It's pretty cool, right? So here we go. Most good ideas are simple, which is the problem with us. Most good ideas, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch, triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. What the hell? When you kind of look at that, so what's an arch? Anybody know what a keyway is? Keystone?
The last brick that goes in to hold the arch up?
It holds it. And they talk to pass to freedom. And they'll mention this again later in the 5th step. So they're going to give us the elements, how we could create a different experience within inside of ourselves without having to endorse, induce, or go seek. It's something that could happen inside. And that's in essence why we drink, use, and do all that stuff, isn't it? Anybody have a list of things that make them feel better, then make them feel bad for doing it? How many 12-step fellowships are there? Tons. Why? Because people found a solution for the human dilemma that stopped working for them, and then they had to find a new way of coping. That's why they apply these spiritual principles to create a different shade. So, remember that exercise we did in We Agnostics? When it talked about deep down within every human being is the fundamental idea of God, right? Deep down within. And so the exercise was to go back over your life and see how many times you've had that intuition, this feeling of total despair, and then something happened where you felt hope. Anybody ever have that? Something shifted inside where you went from the dark room into a room where there was a bit of hope and light. And you ever notice that happen inside? And I always like the idea of, my mom always brings out old pictures. She brings out these canisters of old pictures, right? And what we do is we go through the pictures. And as we turn some over, some will give us a warm feeling, and then some will create a moment of silence, and then we just take that picture and we put it aside, right? Some pictures will have only half a picture in it. Some pictures will have the face cut out. But it doesn't change time. You know what I mean? And so those elements of how much this shifts within. So they're saying here, they're going to give us the recipe on how to create this change. And for us to be convinced like they were convinced, being convinced that we were at step 3, is that the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Where that is for us is in the 4th and 5th step. Because we won't be able to see it, because what we suffer from is a self-centered, selfish basis of looking at things. What we do is we keep ourselves from the truth. Because if we could see ourselves the way other people have seen us, it would be crippling. We have moments of it. Anybody have they call that moment of clarity? How many people start crying when you see, right? Moment of clarity, and then we put the smoke and mirrors up again, right? Anybody? And that's self-preservation. So a lot of us, why the 4th step's so scary, is because we try going in it alone. Remember, what we're accessing is this power. So we're saying, okay, okay, God, I'm in. Okay, I'm in. Show me what you got. I'm ready to do this thing. I'm going to face me in the light of your experience. For the first time in my life, I'm going to face me in the light of their experience. I'm going to go through their process. It didn't kill them, so I should come out of this better than what I went in it. Right? So this human condition, as I go through this, and it's really, really cool. So on page 63 here, a lot of people think this is the step 3 promise. This is when we sincerely took such a position, this archway, right, where we pass to freedom, is a result of a course of action. And where they talk about here is their experience having made this decision and gone through this course of action. So read that this week. On page 63. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. Read what it's saying there. They're giving a summary of the 12-step process. Then they say, we were now at step 3. We are now at step 3. Now they're going to show us how to create this experience that we just read on page 63 here as the result of this course of action. We'll read step 3 this week, because we're going to get into that next week, and see if you could see what they're really saying there. What's step 3 a summary of? If you read it, see if you could see what the summary is in step 3. What is this prayer? What's the summary of this prayer? What's the idea that is presented? Does that kind of make sense? So we're going to see their experience at the top of the page, right? As a result of the position of them making a decision, going through the course of action, and then we're about to embark on the same course of action they did. Am I willing to go to anything? Am I willing to do what they did to have the experience? So as we were looking at this thing, we kind of, it's interesting that we're starting to look at the human dilemma. Anybody notice that? The human condition, right? And so when we kind of looked at page 63 here, and they talked about their experience, right? A lot of people read page 63 up here, and they think, oh, that's the step 3 promise. Well, there's really no singular promise connected to any particular step. It may kind of sound weird. They may talk about certain, hopefully, experiences as the result of going through the process, but it's really as the result of these steps. You hear people say, oh, that step 9 promises or the step 10 promises. If you can get the promises by doing 9 steps, how many people would do just 9 steps? right? And that's so we read about them in step 9, and we read about these certain experiences in step 10, and when we get there, we'll see it's kind of like an overview. But here, it's really interesting. When they talk about when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. What position are they talking about? Right? Because they clarified that on the page earlier, page 62, right? This is the how and why of it. First, we had to quit playing God, right? It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, I like that, God was going to be our director. He's the principal. We're his children. Most good ideas are simple, so they give us the idea of this structure of the idea of following directions or following kind of input. Yes? They give us the principle, like he is the father, we're his children, we're his agents, and kind of, so that means kind of following the dictation or the guidance of something other than ourselves, right? So when they talked about the human perplexity here on page 62, 63, they started talking about, 60, 61, 62, they talked about this selfish, self-centered, that we think is the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. In order to get a good grasp of what they're talking about, we're going to need to do the same thing they did for that discovery, right? When they talk about, the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot or the human condition, right? They talk about so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. So our inability to see how we create our own reality is really difficult to see. We have moments of it, right? We have moments, but the overall, how did I get here? Why is this always happening? Why do I feel and think the way I do? Anybody? Why am I a victim to, right, misery and depression? Why am I in conflict? Why? So most of us, yes, are sure other people are to blame, yes? Well, 100%. So that's why later when they get into it, they talk about it in the 5th step, because one of the things they talk about is reading through this, and then we go through the application of it, right? So when they talk about a self-appraisal, it's hardly self-sufficient. Right? That's why when they talk about here on page 62, is they're talking about they arise out of ourselves. Where they got the indication of that is in the 4th step, right? And we're going to kind of cover some of those basics tonight. But they talked about here on page 60, being convinced we were at step 3. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And then they say, what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? So they're talking about their experience, are they not? And so as we go through here, they talk about when we sincerely took such a position, what position? That he is the father, we're his children, that we're going to move in a new direction. Does that kind of make sense? We need to find a new way of operating, a new way of going through our lives, because the way we've been doing it doesn't seem to be working out well, even though we can't see it all the time, right? Because the characteristics of the human, right? The human kind of experience is, I'll try harder. Yeah. Yep. Or I'll punish you more. Compliance, right? It's just like work. When you're working, things are fantastic when you do what you're supposed to be doing, right? But when you're not doing what you're supposed, the foreman gives you a hard time, right? They have the talk. It's kind of like that. We do the same with our lives, right? And at least when we go through this process, we'll have union representation, right? Right? We won't be no longer representing ourselves all the. May sound kind of weird, right? Most jobs have a union. You go through a probationary period, and that's going through this process is a probationary period, because at any time something may interfere with your decision of going through that, right? It may sound kind of weird, like when anybody ever have a job, you think, yay, and then this isn't working out, we're going to have to let you go, right? And it's kind of like somewhere through this process, your brain is going to continuously try to outgovern you to not participate in this. Anybody find that interesting? How many people's found their own thinking challenging so far, trying to pay attention, try to go through what's being presented in the book without argument and rebuttal? Anybody spend a lot of time rebuttaling an argument, or we read something and then you go off into the negotiation section of the mind and let's look at this again without anybody's input but my own, right? And so it's like, oh boy, here we go. So what they talk about here, here's an interesting question. So everybody got a pen and paper? So is the application, is the solution to alcoholism and the solution to the human dilemma the same thing? Quite the question, right? Because we have two things going on here, right? We have the human condition and we have alcoholism. Is it the same solution for both?
I think going through the solution is outlined.
So what do we need to experience in order to recover from alcoholism?
To have a higher power.
Well, that is what we need to get access to. But what do we need to happen?
Spiritual experience.
Yeah, step 12, right? So once this condition is removed, the psychic change or spiritual experience, as the result of these steps, then we're left with what? The human component. That's why we apply these principles to our human condition. We don't apply it to alcoholism, right? So we don't treat alcoholism. We have a solution for it. And the solution is a psychic change or spiritual experience, yes? Mm-hmm. That's a byproduct through going through this course of action. So it's kind of like a catch-22. Unless I have this psychic change or spiritual experience, then I can't treat the human condition. But we're treating the human condition as we go through here to get some relief through spiritual principles that create the psychic change. Right, this phenomenon. Remember the doctor talked about this phenomenon? Because it's really, when you think about it, it's pretty wild that going through a course of action, as outlined in here, can create such a change in our attitude and outlook, the rearrangement in our own mind, sufficient enough for us to recover from an illness that's killing us. How do you explain that?
Pretty mind-blowing.
It's pretty, which is good. Mind-blowing is a good thing for us.
Yes, it is.
Some of us need a real overhaul there, right? So it's kind of like, AA is kind of like, is like, if you own a vehicle, right, and you ever get those deficiency things, they say, call back. Well, there's something the matter with your vehicle. You got to bring it back for servicing. That's what AA is for the human condition. It's like, we got to call you back for some servicing, right, to create this change, right? So it's pretty good. So we see that they talk about here, when we sincerely took such a position, that's the position that God is now going to be our director. We're his agents. He's the Father, we're his children. Guidance, right? Get access to this power, right? All sorts of remarkable things followed as the result of, not happened. We're more like the what happened part. We like it happens now. Later has kind of never been one of our strong suits, right? Here, take this now and you'll feel better later. No, I want something to feel better now. We're now kind of people, right? Later, do you have anything else? No, we don't have anything else. Right? And here's the contract. This is something that even today I resort back to it, because the guys who took me through it said this is a contract between me and the Creator, or me and the life force, me and God, whatever. We're okay with that because we work through, we agnostics, right? The contract between me and the creative of the universe, whatever you want to call it, the fourth dimension. He talks about here, we had a new employer, being all-powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. How would we stay close to him and perform his work well? What was the indication of being close? What does that mean? Conscious. That we move from the cheese factory to an experience that's deep down, that intuitiveness that we talked about, and we agnostics that we've all had. Anybody have that insight? That voice to say, don't do that. You ignored it. And then you went and did it, and then you said, I should have listened to myself, right? But we didn't see the benefit of listening to that voice. Anybody? because I want what I want when I want it, right? Why work for it when I can steal it and ask for forgiveness later? We're always over remorseful when we get caught. You ever notice that? Never before? Anyways, we'll leave that alone. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well, meaning, right, established on such a footing we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. This is where I use the terminology moving from stage 1 recovery into stage 2 recovery. Because stage 1 recovery, who are you in counsel with? Self, right? How many people's had a problem this week and thought endlessly about that problem? And then you kind of went, well, I can't figure it out. And then you went, oh, should I pray about it? And then you wonder, I don't know how God's going to do it. I've thought about it all week. And we never do that. I don't know how God's going to fix this thing. I thought of every angle there is. It's really wild when you think about that, right? Okay. Yeah, even funnier later. Okay. Interested in our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. That's a different position. What we could contribute, what we could bring to the table. How could I be of service, right? Instead of the other way around. Before it was always about us. What can I get out of this, right? Why aren't they asking me to share at a meeting? Because you got nothing to say. No, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? Here we go. The qualifier, as we felt new power flow in. New power, right? Flow. As we enjoyed peace of mind. As we discovered we could face life successfully. As we became, what's that big word? Yeah, of his presence. Right? We begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and hereafter. We are reborn. I mean, we have a whole new way of, that used to bother me, that reborn kind of had the smack of, but, working through it, what do they mean by that is I have a new way of operating, looking at things and governing my life. Pretty cool when you think about that, right? That experience. And the only examples we have are the people that went before us. So when the guys talked to me about this, before I started on this course of action, they told me about experiences that I thought the more they talked about their experience, the more crazy I thought they were. But I had nowhere else to go. Right? Like I was hoping if I could achieve that level of crazy, then I'm going to be happy, right? Because I was suffering from my problems. They seem to be living quite okay with them, right? When there are those two who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, well, they get to a place where you get to enjoy some of them, right? You don't suffer from them so much, right? But that takes a little while. So this is a contract between me and God. So they asked me to think about it. If you had an employer being all-powerful, being able to supply what we need, not what we want, the big difference. Most people in Step 11 pray about 4 things. Step 11 is praying about things. Big difference in approach. Most of us are always praying for something, like Santa Claus list. Right? God, I seem to be busy, but can you look after this, this, and this, and I'll take care of this, this, and this. Anybody? Yeah, you can have these problems. I'll take care of everything else. Oh, boy. Okay. So, hereafter, we're reborn. So this is a contract between me and God. And the way they kind of look at it, if I had an employer, if I told you, man, I'm getting this job, and they're going to supply me with a daily expense account, car, everything I could possibly need to function at the job. How many people think that's a pretty sweet job? And you think, yeah, why not? That's possible, right? On the human element. And then you think, well, you're going to enter this relationship with this creator that's going to supply all that you need, and you kind of balk at the idea. What do you mean, all that I need? Right? Need and wants 2 different things. So it's kind of interesting. So anytime I've ever had a jam where something's coming through my human element, I can't see the outcome of it, that's where I go through this process, and it enables me to find a different detour, a different road. Remember we talked about last week about the director? He knows what's happening. He knows the scenes. Even though I'm working over here doing this, I can't see how it all goes together. But when the movie comes all together, you go, wow, that was pretty cool. I worked on this scene. I worked on this scene. I worked on this scene. But even though the scene I was working on was at the beginning of the show, it was for the end of the movie. And some of the scenes I worked at the end of the show were for the beginning of the movie. Right? But if I kind of looked at it with my limited understanding, I'd go, what the hell's going on here? Right? That's why one of the promises they talked about will suddenly realize, which is the most powerful part of the whole problem. You'll suddenly realize God's doing, right? Suddenly realize that means something's been happening without my acknowledgement. And then when I fully tune into it, it's like, holy smokes, there's something pretty profound happening here. And these coincidences, especially when you get into your nines, when you start doing your nines and we get doing 11 while we're doing our nines, it's pretty remarkable the things that start happening. And the most remarkable part of that is you start to have your own experience with this thing, right? What's motivating me is the people that went before me, their experience. And a lot of it sounds a little far-fetched, out like, come on. And then when you start experiencing it, then you talk about it, and people look at you like, come on. So it's a pretty wild thing. So we're now at step 3. That's a long preparation from being at step 3, and now we're at step 3. Right? So it took 3 pages, basically, to prepare us for step 3. And what was the basis of that preparation is the human element. Why we can't fix self with self, why we can't depend on our own thinking and reasoning, what's the handicap, right, of all these things that we can't see, feel, and touch. Because on one hand, we can be kind, considerate on the other hand, but still the show doesn't come off. And then what usually happens if we don't find a solution, right, that brings about a sense of ease and comfort to the human perplexities, then what happens is the insanity returns, right? Which is kind of weird. They talk about even Bill, when he got in his story, he talked about having the same human problems, but he had a solution for that. He was in a different position. Was he plagued with resentments? Was he plagued with depression? These things nearly drove him back to drink. But what saved the day was the application of these principles. Going to work with another human being would get him tapped in again and give him the elements of moving past where he wasn't moved past before, which is kind of cool, right? So this is interesting. Now look at this. Many of us, we're now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Well, what's God's will for me at this point in time? Do I know what God's will for me is? Well, think about it.
Help us recover.
Well, we looked at step 1, yes? We looked at step 2, yes? We know we need to have this experience step 2 talks about, right? Right? I need to get access to this power, right? So I'm making a decision to do the rest of the work. What's God's will for me at this point in time is to do the rest of the work to get this connection, right? To go through the probationary period, right? I've done the application. Hey, you got the job, right? You start tomorrow. Okay, pack a lunch. And then it's like, oh my God, I got to go to work tomorrow. And you sit there and think all night about the job you haven't even been at yet. Very possible. So here they're saying, relax, we already got an outline for you, right? So here we go. To build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Am I capable of that now? Then I wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps, would I? It's an idea. It's a prayer. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Right? That's our hope, isn't it? So what's our problem before? We're plagued with self. Are we? Not? But do we have enough access to power to create a shift yet? But the idea is there, right? Relieve me of the bondage of self. We see that I'll see more what that looks like as time goes on. What they call bondage, I used to call just a normal day of thinking. Right? Business as usual. I got a Stephen King movie going on in my brain. How you doing? Oh, I'm happy. Good. You want to tell your face? I don't know. It's just kind of the bondage itself, that I may better do thy will. Do I know what God's will for me is at this stage? Is to go through the process. That's the best I can guess right now. Because the first time they asked me to really participate in that is where? Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. That's when I get to participate in the seeking and the guidance and realigning my will along God's will for me. Because a lot of people, it's kind of like, it's like, this is my will. It's like, here you go. Put it in an envelope, give it to God. And then by step 11, I get it back. It says, here you go. It's the proper use of will, right? Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people give you the impression that when I do step 3, well, it must be God's will. Oh, boy. Nothing happens in God's will by mistake. That's right. Nothing happens. That's why we're going to look at the 4th step. We're going to see why it happened. You see some of that stuff you've been claiming as God's will, you're going to have to make amends for. Right? So upon investigation, we see nothing happens by mistake. There's a reason for it. Back when I was getting sober, they used to say, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Anybody ever hear that?
Yeah, sure.
Based on the stupid shit you've been doing, where else do you expect to be? They don't say that part anymore, right? So anyway, they've gotten sensitive. I'm making friends yet? Okay, so take away my difficulties. What are those? I would put my difficulties associated with people, places, and things, all external things. Where's all our difficulties? This person, that person, this, that, the other thing. So we think our difficulties lie outside of us, yes? Mm-hmm. How many people have been thinking all week about things they got to fix outside of themselves? Mm-hmm. Now you're back overexerting. Oh, should I be kind here or should I be more? Oh, wait a minute. Damn. Okay. Right. Yeah. Getting good now. Take away my difficulties. So we'll see. That's getting into 6 and 7 stuff. Right? Take away my difficulties. That would be in 6 and 7. The bondage would be 4 and 5. Yes? Mm-hmm. Interesting here, eh? That victory over them may bear witness to those that would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Wow, it sounds like 11 and 12. If I was capable of experiencing these things here by reading them, would I need to do the rest of the steps? If I could actually turn my will and life over to God in 3, I wouldn't need to do nothing else, would I? But remember, the problem what we suffer from is driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. So when you hear people talking about this shit, it's like, where do you get that idea? My sponsor said, where do you get that idea from? Well, I formulated it based on self. I created it. So right? So I need to be able to see where it's me or it's something other than me and being able to navigate through that. Right now, before I go through this process, it's just me and my inability to navigate through my own thinking. I'm always back to being hostage to my thinking, feeling, and ideas and outlooks. Anybody? My alone time is not very recommended. That's why they tell you, go to as many meetings as you can. Why is that? So you're not left alone with you. Right? Your alone time is not good. It's not considered, right? Even in a meeting, you find it hard to be here. Because you're thinking. That's the human problem, right? Anybody ever watch a TV show? A commercial comes on, you forget what you're watching?
Yeah.
Or you could be driving your car, you go see 3 or 4 lights and go, oh my God, were they red, green? I've been thinking no the whole time through it, right? And then you realize if you're thinking, imagine all those other drivers out there make you really nervous. Okay, we'll leave that alone. Okay, so, thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. So that again is step 11. May I do thy will always, right? So now they're going to qualify this. You got to follow it. A lot of people just read something and they go with that. Like it's not. This literature is not put together as to formulate a doctrine. You know what a doctrine is? How many people have been to church? Well, they'll take one paragraph and they'll do a whole sermon on it, right? We do that in AA. We'll read something, take a snippet out of it, not read the whole thing before it, during, and after, and we'll make a whole, not like page 417. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems. It doesn't actually say that. You got to look at what he's talking about. What is he talking about? He just finished having an argument with his wife. And if anybody's been married here, you know acceptance is the answer. Because the more you argue with her, the worse it's going to get, right? Huh? And restrain the tongue and silence and all that other stuff. Even though your brain's going off this way, she's going, it's like, okay, honey, I love you. That's not what the other part of the brain's saying. But if I want peace of mind in my house, like I'm the head of the household, right? I'm the head, but my wife's the neck. Right? My wife, I'm the boss in public, right, honey? She goes, yes. So, like my wife runs, yeah, she's awesome. Okay, so we'll leave that at that. We'll get to that later in the 4th. Okay, so here we go. Ready? We thought well before taking this step, making sure we're ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. We thought well before taking this step. Well, if we went with what we thought it meant, then none of us would ever be ready for this step. We thought well before taking this step. Well, that disqualifies 95% of us because none of us are really thinking well. So what are they talking about? We thought well before taking this step. So we kind of covered it. We looked at step 1, right? Our condition. Yes? And we see what our fate is to die an alcoholic death or to accept spiritual help. Why do I need spiritual help? Because I need to experience the psychic change or spiritual experience. If I don't, then the outcome is I'm going to continue to relapse. We thought, well, that where they talk about we're on a life and death errand here. They talk about that later, right? And they talk about we have 2 alternatives. What's an alternative? But an alternative means as the result of. An alternative route.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? So you ever have your GPS and you see the traffic here, it'll kind of suggest a different route. Just because you see a different route doesn't mean you're on it, right? But when you get on that route, and as you're traveling along that path, you're no longer in the trouble zone. As the result of taking this turn and moving along this new route, I'm on a new course of action. Does that kind of make sense? So as the result of this new alternative route that I'm on now, I'm no longer in danger of suffering from this condition over here. So alternative doesn't mean like you're in a grocery store, you could have this or this, right? And you choose ahead of time. It's the result of. Does that kind of make sense? So we see we're a result of step 1. So we'll continue on that path. That's what they're talking about, right? To continue as we are means disaster, right? Or to die an alcoholic death, or to accept spiritual help. We're not always easy alternatives to face. But we found we better or else what? We see what our fate is, right? So we're not arguing now about the life preserver, are we? Like, I don't care where it's made. Will it float? Will it save me from drowning? I'll take it. Does that kind of make sense? But if you know how to tread water, no, my friends are going to see me with that. I'm not wearing that. Right? It's just the human perplexity. My wife can't swim. So when we go on a boat, she always asks, is there life preservers, right? Where do you think my wife has her life preserver?
Wearing it.
She's wearing it. I know how to swim. Where do you think my life preserver is? I'm sitting on it, protecting my brains. No. I'm not alone there, right? A lot of us go, right? Okay, moving on. So we thought well before taking the step, making sure we're ready. At least we could abandon. Abandon, what does abandon mean?
Let it go.
Hmm?
Just say let it go.
Okay, so let's look. Abandon. What is abandoned ship? What would abandoned ship look like?
Leave it.
Leave it.
Yeah.
Does that mean go down to go down to where your room is and kind of gather your stuff and abandon? Abandoned ship means, yeah, your life depends on it, right? So what this is kind of like, my sponsor kind of explained it is, where I am now is an act of providence. Anybody ever looked up that word?
It did. Oh, it's an act of God.
Yeah, it's an act of something that is, so I'm in, it puts me in a lifeboat. I was in the water, right, dying of this thing. Now I'm in the lifeboat. But I'm not out of the woods yet because I still have what we call exposure, right? I can still die of hypothermia of the elements that I was suffering from in the water, but now I'm in the boat, right? Or you hear people of second drowning. You ever hear that? People, right, and they die at home from yeah, the second drowning is called at home when you're alone. In your sleep, you end up actually drowning. Or the same with, I do level 3 first aid, is sometimes is there's the accident and then there's the shock, right? And so what you got to do is treat the shock and the elements at the same time to get them to help, right? So you sustain them, right, in between. So you're in between the catastrophe and getting them to help, sustaining life. And that's kind of like where we're at now, is the abandon. I'm in the lifeboat, but I'm not out of the woods yet, am I?
No.
Right? I need to get to,
Land.
yeah, I need to get to the shore or whatever. I need to get to that place where it's treated, right? So it's interesting. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person such as our wives, best friend, or spiritual advisor. After the meeting, I always, like we could do, for those who are ready to do step 3, we could do step 3 together. If you're not ready to do it, you could just run like the room's on fire, right? And we'll do step 3 together if you want to do it, right? Or you could do it alone, whatever. I always found it very interesting to do it in a group. But it's better to meet God alone than one might misunderstand. The wording, of course, was quite optional, so long as we express the idea. What's the idea?
Letting God direct us.
Yeah, we're looking for a new director, right? I'm looking for a new way of governing my life. I'm looking at this thing that people are offering as a solution, as an alternative for me continuously going the way I'm going. So if you're happy with what you got, then you don't need to do this. You'll continue getting what you've always gotten. that's confirmed. Anybody ever, right? So if we're willing to move in a new direction, so express the idea. The idea is, here's the Father, we're his children. I could have a new way of living through spiritual principles that create a shift sufficient enough for me to experience and everybody around me. Not only for me to experience, but everybody around me. How cool is that when you think about that, right? How many people around you would like to have a new experience with you? Yeah, you're at a meeting, they're praying, I hope today's the day. One of those things. Oh, they've been, yeah. I always like the people talk about the promises are coming true. Well, can we ask the people around you? Let's not get carried away. Okay. Voicing of without reservation. This was only, what's that big word?
Only a beginning.
Beginning. Though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a great one, was felt at once. But it's still only a beginning. the idea that she gives you the phone number doesn't mean you're getting married yet. You still got a phone, right? But it's still a one-sided relationship, isn't it? Anybody ever get a phone and think, oh, man, I can't wait, man. It's one-sided. The other person don't even know what's going on. Yes? That's where we're at with this. It's a one-sided relationship. I like the idea, man. This sounds fantastic. It's exciting. But I still need to go through the phone number. Does that kind of make sense? It needs to be a two-way relationship here, right? I've had a lot of one-way relationships. Anybody? Yeah. Anyways, we'll leave that one alone. We'll take care of that in the fourth, too. Okay, so. Yeah. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Okay.
That would simmer for a little while.
That would simmer for a little while. Okay. Next. What does next mean? Next. You're going to do this. Next. After what? After I've gone through the first three proposals, I made a decision to do what? The rest of the work. That's what step 3 is. To do the rest of the work. So I could formulate this relationship, get access to this power, God, creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, frequency, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is get access to this power that will create this change that I need to experience in order to recover and have a solution for the human perplexity, the human dilemma. Yes? Mm-hmm. Next, we lunged out on a course of vigorous action. I'm not even going to make a joke. I just want Some of you understood that later. Okay. Vigorous action. Oh, yeah, okay. So, let's move on fast. We'll take care of that in the fourth, too. Okay, so, vigorous action means get busy, right? Get busy. Vigorous means with purpose. Like, you got to get busy. We're on a life and death errand here. Because if you're in the water, you need to get out of the water. Right? The longer you're in the water, the odds are against you. But you're the lifeboat, you're in the lifeboat. Now you got to get to the medical bay. They got you in blankets, all this stuff. But you got to get to the first aid. Does that kind of make sense? Which is really cool later on when you're working with others. They talk about what we do is administer first aid. Right? Spiritual is kind of wild. They use that terminology. Okay, ready? The first step of which is a personal house cleaning. So what's the first step in confirming our decision? How do you know you've done step 3?
Ready to move on to the step 4?
A personal house cleaning.
Yeah.
I'm ready to start on this personal house cleaning. It's interesting how they do that. House cleaning. House cleaning. You ever live in a house that's this total shithole?
No.
No? Sorry to hear that. Type A personality, right? Everything's got to be... So, as a bachelor, back in the day, and it could still unsupervised, I could let things go a little sideways, right? So, but when I want to feel better, I clean the house, right? So it's one of those things is maybe I'm alone in this, but I could spend like clean the entire bathroom, shower, stall, clean it, clean, toilet, everything. What's the first thing I want to do when I clean the bathroom? Have a shower.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's like anybody ever put new sheets on the bed and not take a shower? You got to take a shower, and the new sheets, and it's kind of like it's just me again. Well, I've never had sheets, so it was a big adventure when I actually got a bed that was off the floor. Like, 27. Okay, so that's another story. Okay, so personal house cleaning. I like this, which many of us have never attempted. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by strenuous Strenuous, yes? Effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which has been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to cause and conditions. Now they're going to give us the outlay. Remember before they get in there, they give us an overview, and then they show us how to do it, right? They give us the purpose, overlay. Remember when they talked about the obsession, right? Our first obsession is ourselves and fixing ourselves. Then they give us an example of that, right? So they're going to look at, well, what do they mean by these blocks? How are we going to look at this in a way that kind of makes sense, right? Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Interesting how the best examples they give is not personal, right? Is to look at it. Like when I tell stories sometimes, if you try to make it personal, we can't see it. But if you do it, like let's have all look over here, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? So they're giving us that same kind of approach here. Taking a commercial inventory, is there a difference between a commercial inventory and a business inventory? Huh? No, same thing. What they're saying is you're going to learn a process, be it commercial, business, same thing. Yes? We need, right? What do we need to do? So, taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding, fact-facing process. So what are they asking us to do? Well, it's going to be a fact-finding and fact-facing process. Is an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsalvageable goods, to get rid of them promptly without regret, not to work on them, to get rid of. These things that cause our blocks, that cause our defeat, that cause our problems, we don't work on them. They need to be removed. If they stay present, then it works toward the failure of my business. Right? I have my own business. There's certain elements and certain stuff that I got double checks and all that other stuff to make sure the billing and all that stuff's right. Certain principles that I have to adhere to. Because if I don't, it could mean my demise. Does that kind of make sense? So, one object is to disclose damaged or unsalvageable goods, to get rid of them promptly without regret. If the owner of the business is going to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. What does that mean, values? Is what things we take value is kind of stuff that's important to me, but not important to anybody else. Like when I was doing the home Zoom, like behind me I have a 3-shelf display of things that are important to me. Each knick-knack or each thing has a certain value. Right? But if somebody else looked at this, what is this piece of junk? And I can say, well, this is from my brother. Right? When he died, he used his life. It has value to me. Right? But there's some things before going through this process that I used to have value to. Anything that you hang on to has a form of value. Everything that you think of and spend energy on. Remember on page 54? The fabric of these feelings and these ideas, the fabric of our existence was shot through with these things, these values, these worships, where I spend energy. Whoa. Anybody think about stuff that's totally detrimental to your well-being, but you can't help but think about it? You hold value in them. I'm not even going to make a joke. We're going to move on. Okay. Value. Cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. To take stock honestly is to honestly say what's present. Not to be like some of my thinking was whacked out before I started the 4. Like some of it was like, whoa. I was honest about what was in my thinking. I didn't sort out my thinking before and then put it on paper. I put my thinking on paper. I took a canvas of what was up here and I put it in front of me in black and white. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so which is really interesting. First we searched out the flaw in our makeup, which caused our failure. Here we go. We did exactly the same thing with our lives, right? Went back over it. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaw in our makeup, which caused our failure. I don't know what that is. So I need to go through a process, an inventory, a new way of looking at things that is not the way I look at things. I need a new way of looking at things because the way I look at things is not working toward my betterment. It's still working toward my detriment, right? My thinking is still driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion. I'm sure other people are more to blame for my situation, my feelings, right? I can't see what they're talking about, how they arise out of myself, how I invited 98% of everything that's ever happened to my life, I've been a participant in. I am. I did not know that at the beginning of the 4. Everybody else did. I didn't. It took me doing the 5th step. After I did the 5th step, I left there and went, holy shit, I'm the cause of all my problems. The meeting I was at did the wave. Yay! Finally, I said, oh my God, we're going to have some peace in this meeting now. Okay, right, caused our failure. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways which had defeated us, we considered as common manifestations. What does manifestations mean? How it presents itself, how it shows, right? Manifestation, how it comes about, yes? So we're going to consider its common manifestations to the things that have been what? Defeating us, which in turn are these blocks, right? So I need to get the common manifestation of the things that are defeating us, right? For us, it's very in particular, or the human dilemma. Anybody with these things that this is the cause to the human kind of experience. Really, anybody that has these things, but with them, they don't get drunk. We continue to get drunk. Does that kind of make sense? Like, I remember I walked by, and I was explaining something from a workshop, and my wife goes, oh, I feel the same way. And I got alarmed for a second. I said, you do? I said, I can't afford resentments. We were going through this thing. She says, I can. So she was going to make these people pay. I said, I can't afford. She says, she can, and I kind of got alarmed. She goes, wait a minute. She says, the difference between me and you is you'll find yourself at the bottom of a bottle still thinking it's true, and somewhere along the line I'll stop because I see it's not working and take a different direction. So, right? Because she has that working part of the mind that I don't seem to have. Like I was talking about my daughter last week. She able to take stock, realize what she was doing wasn't working. She realized it was stemming from her. So she took some time out of her life to reevaluate things and get some help and some direction on how to rearrange some of her thinking and attachments. Put that in the application. She has a totally different experience. I don't seem to have that part of the brain back then. But I need to get that part of the brain. I need to be able to see the things in myself that are causing me my failure, causing me my demise, causing me my emotional deformities. I need to see how these things arise out of me. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't see that. It didn't say I can't feel it, but now I'm feeling it. So it's everybody else around me feeling. Anybody? Because I've never met anybody yet new, especially when new before this process, has ever gone, boy, I spent all day thinking. I can't wait to do that again tomorrow. Right? Just the way the brain is. The next thought's never better than the thought you just finished. Anybody? And it's funny, we sit up like this, oh, it's a beautiful day. Thought comes out of nowhere, go, oh my God. And then you're like, anxiety, and you're almost hyperventilating, and they're ready to do the serenity prayer. There's nothing happening. You just become a prisoner again to anybody? Normal people go, well, this isn't working for me, and shift their thinking. What? Don't you want to see the ending? Don't you want to see what happens? Again? How many people punish people more than one way?
Oh, yeah.
I've done this, that's not good enough. We're going to try this way now. All right, sons of a bitches. Drag them farther. There's still some skin left. Sorry. We'll take care of that in the fourth, too. Okay. So we're going to look at the common manifestations on the things that have defeated us. Yes? Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything. Right? It doesn't destroy my wife, doesn't destroy my kids, it destroys me. Right? Because it creates a block. I need to get access to this power, find a power which I can live. It has to be my lifeline. I can't swim. I need a life jacket. I'm okay with that. Like, if you haven't been through We Agnostics, and we say you have to find this life jacket, you'd have a problem with that. Oh, they talk about life jackets too much in that meeting. It's just God, this power. Because when we talk about God, what are we talking about? This power that originates, we get access where? Within. Right? We just, if we call it a peanut butter and jam sandwich, you still be, what kind of bread you're using. Like, there'd always be a problem no matter what you. That's why we went through We Agnostics, right? Kind of, okay. So, ready? It destroys more alcohol from it. From it. From what? The resentment, right? From it. We're talking about resentment is the common manifestation. It's one of them. There's 4 of them in here, 4 things that create the common manifestation of the things that defeat me, that block me off. That things that I called assets. But they're not assets, but I can't see that, right? These things. The first one is resentment. The second one is fear. The third one is conduct. And then the fourth one is harms. These are the 4 things that block me off. And when I could see that recipe and how they're connected, then all the other stuff that later they talk about, when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sun. So anything that creates emotional deformity in me, I'm able to recognize and take corrective measures. So what I'm learning is spiritual martial arts. It may sound kind of weird, but it made sense to me. Something's beating the crap out of me. I need to learn self-defense, right? This is spiritual self-defense. What kind of is the application of new ideas to sidestep this thing where it no longer attaches to me, and I created new experience, right? It's pretty cool when I looked at it that way. I thought it was pretty well. So, ready? From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. From what? From resentments. From alcoholism? From resentments stems all forms of spiritual disease. All forms. Right? The emotional, all that stuff, all forms of it connected to the emotional attachment to the resentment. The value we place on the resentment. We have value to these resentments. Right? We do. We spend a lot of time nurturing them, harboring them, carrying them, finessing them, working them. They're mine. Back off. Right? Yes? Anybody? They're mine. Okay. Yes, they are. Please don't share. Okay. From it stems all forms of spiritual. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. What causes the spiritual sickness? That's one of them, the common manifestation, the resentment. Yes? Mm-hmm. Very clear. Anybody that harbors this amount of resentment, you think they'd be spiritually sick? Do we hold the market on being spiritually sick? No. Right? The whole world is kind of... Some of them people need help. Okay. You watch the news? Holy smokes. When the spiritual malady, remember the word describing there's something the matter. We really can't define it, but it's obviously present, and it happens on an emotional deformity level within, right? And we won't get into it later. In 11, I'll bring up something else. When a malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we're angry, period. So this is it. Get a piece of paper like this, fold it in half. People, so what, half? Fold it in half on top to bottom. People, is this the right way of folding it? Oh, you stay close, okay? So then you got 4 sides to it, yes? And you fold it. On the one side, put it down, sit quietly for a second, as quietly as you can. Do the 3rd step prayer, the idea, right? And then so the idea, and then what's the exercise? To write the resentments down, not to go over them. Write them down. So I thought, what do you mean I'm not resentful? It says, people you were mad at. How about that? You got people you still got to get even with? Yeah, okay, yeah, I got them, right? So they said, whatever comes to mind. Whatever comes to mind. What do you mean by that? If I sit and I ask myself, who am I resentful, angry at, and somebody comes to mind, I write it down. So first person comes to mind, mom, dad, brother, whatever. Mom, dad. And then I start writing the list down. People, places, and things, as it unfolds in my mind. Then you'll come to one where you don't want to write down. And you'll think about it for 2 days. And you'll be defiant about the idea of writing that name or person, place. So what you're starting to do is you're starting to become an observer of how your brain operates with information on the application of participating in saving your own life and the resistance you have to it. We'll think about the list a lot longer than writing it out. That's a part of the deficiency within your own mind that talks you out of doing the thing that you agreed that you needed to do in 3. Abandon. That means write whatever comes to mind. If it comes to mind and your mind goes, well, I've already dealt with that, is that the exercise? If you have dealt with it, would have come to mind. The reason it comes back to mind again is because there's still some emotional deformity attached to it, or there's 4 or 5 resentments behind that one. So you write it down. And then you got a list of people, places, things. Now, on the one, I put the guy with the blue cap. Do you know what I'm talking about? I do. That was the first time I made my list out of all, in the 11 years of in and out, all the different inventories I've ever done of me going through my thinking and seeing what was the story. It's not about the story. It's about these things that come to the surface. So your subconscious will say, you got this, you got this, you got this, you got this, and you just make a list of them. So say if you start going through the story again, is that the point of the exercise? What would you do if you started becoming attached to it again? 3rd step prayer, and then you start seeing the word. Relieve me of the bonnet, take away my difficulties. Give me the power to face this thing. Allow me to step back from the emotional attachment to it and just write it down. So now you're what you're trying to do, instead of being a participant, like, right? You're trying to take your thinking and push it in front of you where you're an observer without detachment. And right, does that kind of make sense? So write that list, and for those who want to do the 3rd step prayer, we'll do it afterwards. Live long and prosperous. We're going to have a great time. You guys are going to enjoy this.